Ok, buonasera a tutti, ci siamo, dovreste vedere me. Buonasera a tutti, hello everybody. Questa è la prima volta che facciamo un evento in italiano e in inglese, quindi parlerò soprattutto in italiano, spero che i nostri ospiti English speaker possano perdonarci. Innanzitutto buonasera a tutti, questo è l'ultimo degli eventi degli Slow News Days del 2021, un po' in ritardo perché abbiamo dovuto organizzarci con una diretta transatlantica. Infatti sono molto contento di presentare qui con noi l'ospite di questa sera per noi, che è mattina per lei, ovvero Ariel Zirnik. I hope pronunciation is not so bad. Che è qui a parlarci di uno strumento assolutamente essenziale qui dalle nostre parti di Snow News, ma poi vedremo anche dalle parti di UPA.it, perché vi presento anche Lorenzo Calia di UPA.it, partner del nostro progetto
Buonasera a tutti.
ciao Lorenzo, insieme a Noisa e a Stedi. Niente, allora Ariel è qui per raccontarci il lavoro che il Membership Puzzle Project ha portato avanti per parecchi mesi, prima e durante la pandemia, per produrre quello che a mio avviso, ma non soltanto a mio avviso, è lo strumento più completo, più preciso e più aggiornato per, diciamo, progettare, portare avanti, lanciare e rendere sostenibile anche un progetto di membership. Se siete qui, la cosa credo che vi interessi molto perché, beh, Slow News sono anni che porta avanti diciamo, questa cultura della membership, dell'appartenenza, se vogliamo dirla in italiano. So I switch in English to let Ariel do her presentation. I just wish to thank you so much for your time, so much for your work, yours and of your team with members of the Membership Puzzle Project. I think we have to say thank you also to Lemfest Institute and the Google News Initiative, who let the membership guide exist, but also support Slow News in those Slow News days. So Ariel, up to you, and thank you so much for your presence here tonight.
Thank you. And I apologize for the background noise. Of course, construction started in the home next door about 10 minutes before this presentation began. So I hope it's not too much background noise. If it becomes too hard to hear me at some point, let me know and we can ask them to stop for a few minutes, possibly. Thank you so much for the introduction. And yes, of course, thank you to the Google News Initiative and the Lenfest Institute who made this possible, not just the original English translation of the membership guide, but also the translation of the guide into Spanish, French, and Portuguese. And we're really excited to have added Italian. We just learned this week that parts of the guide will soon be translated into Hungarian and Ukrainian for part of a training program in those countries. So it's really, really exciting to see the guide travel. I was going to share a little bit today about Membership Puzzle Project and how the membership guide came together, and then give you a little bit of a preview of one of the first sections of the guide and how you might be able to use it in your membership work. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, that worked great. So the Membership Puzzle Project, many of you might be familiar with it, but just in case you're not, we were a public research project that was studying how to optimize news for trust from May 2017 to August 2021. The project wrapped up earlier this year. Me at MPP were especially fascinated with membership as not just a revenue model, but also an editorial orientation that sees readers as much more than an ATM. We think of audience engagement and audience revenue as two sides of the same coin. You can't ask people for their support without having earned their trust and shown up for them, and increasingly ask what they know that you don't. And we worked at the Membership Puzzle Project. We began at New York University, and then we moved over to the Media Development Investment Fund in 2020, who has made a commitment to help keep our work going and has continued to host community calls around membership and support our coaches. And so we're really grateful to the Media Development Investment Fund who is helping to keep this work going since the project ended. The founding Inside a Membership Puzzle project, one of the first things that we started tackling in May 2017 is the difference between subscription and membership, the sort of primary audience revenue models out there. And that's a baseline that I think it's always important to establish before we dig in. In a subscription model, audience members are paying money to get access to a product or a service. It's a transactional relationship in which access to the content is what is being monetized. And this model works well for many businesses, including the Financial Times, the New York Times, The Information. But with membership, members give not just their money, but their time, their connections, their experience, their expertise to support a cause that they believe in. Many members actively contribute to the organization. In its deepest forms, it's a two-way knowledge exchange between journalists and members. It's an opportunity to identify your strongest supporters and enlist them in your quest for impact and sustainability. I think it's important to understand that membership is not a branding campaign that you can turn on and off. It's not a subscription by another name. Membership is a social contract between a news organization and its readers. What do you give and what do you get in return? And I'm not here today to convince everybody to pursue membership or to say that it's the right path for everybody, but to help sort of probe the difference between membership and the other more traditional models that might be out there. And the membership guide, which Slow News has now made available in Italian, I'll share a little bit about how that came together. This membership guide is designed to be a little course on membership. It takes you through the steps of the process. It tells you how to do each one. It identifies best practices. We warn about common mistakes that people make in hopes that you will be able to avoid those mistakes. And our goal really with the membership guide was to gather into one place all the lessons that people have learned as they built their membership program, including the errors and wrong turns. And that was really important to us. The case studies and examples that you see in there, we only included them if they've been tried for long enough that we could give some sort of sense of the results of the things that they were trying. And we also asked for a lot of transparency from the organizations that we featured. And we very often ask them questions sort of, what did you do that you wish you hadn't done? What is something that you wish you had figured out sooner? And so throughout the guide, you'll see a lot of sort of hard-won lessons from news organizations about what works and what didn't. And the membership guide, I think it's important to talk a little bit about the process of creating it, because I think that is one of the reasons why this has resonated so much. I mean, we're still a membership puzzle project shut down in August 2021, and we're still seeing 3,000 to 4,000 people visiting the site a month. And that's a really great feeling for us that we created something that useful. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that we began the process of the membership guide after we had hired the research team. We began with user research. We spoke to 27 newsroom leaders around the world, leaders of startups, leaders of legacy organizations that were shifting to membership. We talked to single person newsrooms. We talked to newsrooms in difficult economic environments where people didn't have as much of a propensity to pay. And we asked each of those people, what are the things that you need to know? What are the biggest challenges that you encounter? What kind of resources have you found useful in the past, et cetera? And from that, we designed this very modular membership guide that allows each person to chart their own journey through the guide. We designed it so that you could jump between sections instead of having to read the whole thing in full. We have case studies sprinkled throughout, and you can also access the case studies on their own. We interviewed more than 50 newsrooms by the time we finished the membership guide. And what you see in the guide is sort of a synthesis of those 50 plus interviews with there. And as they mentioned at the top, we co-published the membership guide with the Lenfest Institute in the United States, and Google News did very graciously financially supported both the research and creation of the original guide and some of the translations that I mentioned before. And what I wanted to sort of start off with is something from the very beginning of the guide. The second section of the guide is a section on the 9 questions to ask yourself before you pursue membership. I think this is where we encourage a lot of organizations to start with the membership guide, because it helps you understand where your gaps might be, and then to decide what other sections of the membership guide you should be spending time with. We don't believe or expect that most people sit down and read the guide from beginning to end in one sitting chronologically. We designed it so that people could jump to the sections very quickly that would help them solve their most urgent problems. And so the first question that we encourage news organizations to ask themselves before pursuing membership is, do you have a loyal audience? You cannot launch a successful membership program or develop memberful routines without having a loyal audience. This is true for the adoption of any audience revenue strategy, whether that's subscription or donation. It's not just true for membership. One caveat to this, of course, is if you're launching with a membership program, you obviously don't have a loyal audience yet. But if you're trying to grow your membership program, you can't do that unless you are focused first on cultivating habit and loyalty amongst your readers or listeners. We're still learning a lot about how to measure loyalty, but there are a few sort of key things that can help guide, and you'll find more on this in the guide. The key user behavior that you're tracking when you're measuring loyalty is repeat action. That repeat action could be 3+ visits to your site per month, which you can find in Google Analytics. It might be opening a free newsletter that you have 75% of the time that it's sent. It could be repeat event attendees. These are some of the sort of repeat actions that we saw newsrooms measuring most often as indicators of their membership success. I think it's important to understand that social media followers are not the same thing as loyal audience members. Many people tend to conflate the few, but those who have sort of relied on an algorithm to make sure that they see your work have not made the commitment that someone who signs up for a newsletter or an RSS feed or events has made, which is to make sure that they don't miss the content. That is where you see the loyalty come in. I want to make sure that I do not miss this, so I am going to make sure that it ends up in my inbox for somebody where I will be sure to see it. That requires a real change in a lot of newsrooms, which fortunately we're a lot further along on now than when we wrote the guide in 2020. But sort of shifting your focus from big traffic spikes to how many people keep coming back. What percentage of audience members are coming back to your site, for example, three times a month or more? The second question to ask yourself is, can you offer transparency and an opportunity to participate? And this is where membership differs from the other audience revenue models. I just talked about how loyalty was important for any. Can you offer transparent participation? This is the question that separates membership from subscription or donations. Members, when we spoke to members of news organizations, we heard that they wanted transparency about organizational financial health and aspirations. Who are the people involved in the organization, including what are their personalities, backgrounds, demographics, career paths? What are your priorities? What's your agenda? How members can help you? What are the processes for making editorial decisions, making pricing decisions? How you respond to criticism. They want to see you giving honest answers when criticism happens, when mistakes are made, how those mistakes are made, and sort of what is your organizational philosophy and culture. At news organizations where we interviewed supporters, even longtime members and donors often couldn't name more than one person behind the site. And if we want to restore the trust that underpins successful membership programs, we have to figure out how to make our processes, our staff, our agenda more visible to people. And this is particularly important now. We're in this world where news organizations are fighting a battle against being called fake news. Being authentic, being transparent is a powerful way to inoculate yourself against that claim of being fake news. And we recognize that some of these strategies won't work in societies where the press is not free, that it can be very dangerous to share personal information about your reporters. In that case, still just sharing how you make editorial decisions, what are some of the basic processes around handling mistakes. Those are small interventions that can go a really long way. And one of my favorite examples of the value of transparency comes from El Diario in Spain. Many of you are likely aware of them. At the beginning of the pandemic, they realized, as they saw advertising plummet, that they needed to raise their prices. And so before they raised their prices, their editor-in-chief wrote this article that you see on the screen. Many of you can probably understand it because there's so many similarities between Italian and Spanish, but it says an emergency plan to guarantee the survival of El Diario. And in that letter, they wrote that they are cutting top newsroom salaries by 10 to 30% and distributing the efforts as equitably as possible in order to avoid layoffs until they have another option. And then further down in the piece, they explained that this wasn't going to be enough, that they were also planning to raise membership prices. I believe at the time it was 60 euro a year, and they raised it to 80 euro a year. When they put that price increase into effect, they also said, if you cannot afford this price, let us know, no questions asked, we will allow you to stay at the original price. But when they raised it, they had very, very few people reach out to ask for that cheaper price. And they felt that one of the reasons that this went over so smoothly, 20 euros is a big increase, but one of the reasons that it went over so smoothly is because they shared all of the steps that they were taking internally to also be more responsible with their money and to sort of extend their runway during a very difficult financial time, especially because it was a difficult financial time for everybody, not just news organizations. And when we talk about participation, one of the most important things to sort of understand before you start offering those opportunities to participate is why your audience members are motivated to participate in your work. And that's going to be different for each news organization. It will vary based on your geography. It will vary based on the type of content that you do. It will be different based on maybe who the others in your market are. But when we spoke to members of news organizations and the people who worked with audience members the most often, what you see on the screen are the 6 motivations to participate that we heard come up the most often. So the first is, I want to learn something new. Curiosity and learning are driving my desire to participate. Maybe they want to contribute their expertise, show off a superpower. Sometimes they just want to have a say and be heard. They want to have a voice. This comes through very strongly, in particular in cooperatively owned news organizations in which the members are also the owners. So they have the opportunity to vote in major strategic decisions for the organization. So you see that motivation really come through there. I want the inside scoop and to learn about your process. So those people who choose to say attend open editorial meetings or learn more about the process, that's one of their motivations. Sometimes all they want to do is show some love for your work because it matters so much to them. They just want to flaunt their passion for your work. And I'll share a really powerful example of that in just a minute. And the last one, but one that we see come up again and again, especially during this pandemic when people felt so sort of acutely alone, is the desire to be a part of something bigger than themselves. So the desire to feel a sense of community. And we really heard across all these news organizations that the sites that resonated most were those that were inclusive and participatory, that offered multiple ways for people outside the organization to take part and contribute what they know. And I think that's a key thing to understand is even amongst your members or your audience members, the motivations to participate might vary. So not all of your members might want to show their expertise. Maybe they don't feel they have an expertise that is useful to a news organization, but those people might be seeking a sense of community around your journalism. And so this is where audience research can be very valuable to understand what is driving your audience members. And this can sound like a lot of work to offer this on top of everything else that you're doing. And that is why the other recommendation that we make at Membership Puzzle Project is to find the intersection point between your audience member motivations, which might be one of the 6 on the screen, might be something totally different, and your needs. For example, to achieve financial sustainability, to find news story ideas, to increase member retention. So we really encourage, especially small news organizations, to not offer participation that doesn't also help you meet a goal in your newsroom. And that's why it's really important to have a clarity about where your newsroom is headed and why you are choosing membership. And a really great example of this comes from this case study on Zetland in Denmark. So you'll find this in the membership guide, and I will make these slides available afterwards. So you'll find links to it there. One great example of sort of that leveraging that passion, your audience member's passion for your work and the importance of transparency come from a campaign from Zetland. Back in 2019, their membership plateaued around 10,000 members. They couldn't really get it much above that. And they realized that they were in trouble because they were still far off from being sustainable and they were running out of time to get there. And traditional marketing strategies hadn't moved the needle. Most of the things that people were recommending hadn't moved the needle. But what they did have that not everybody had was an incredibly passionate membership core, so a really strong, devoted group of super fans. And so what they ended up doing is enlisting their members for help. They wrote this tell-all article laying out their financial situation. They disclosed how many members they had, how many they needed to be sustainable, how many months of runway they had at the 10,000 member mark that they were at. And they asked their members that they would help them get to sustainability by becoming ambassadors. More than 1,000 of their 10,000 members volunteered to be ambassadors, and Zetland equipped them with referral codes, physical recruitment materials, and launched a month-long ambassador campaign. That ambassador campaign brought them 3,500 new members in about a month. It exceeded the goal that they needed to get to in order to reach sustainability. And they've since done 2 more ambassador campaigns and continue to sort of reach or exceed those goals just by leveraging people's sort of passion for Zetland and showing them how they can play a really important role in making sure Zetland continues to exist. The third thing that sounds kind of obvious, because we're journalists, right? And we all know how to tell stories. But do you know how to tell your own story? This is something that a lot of member-driven newsrooms struggle with, is figuring out how to tell a story. If you're going to ask for financial support, you need to be able to serve the public interest, and you need to be able to clearly explain how you do that and how their support for your work will help you get there. If you can't explain what you do and how members help make that possible, you will struggle to make your pitch. You will struggle to convert members. And that membership pitch should not just be about you, and it should not just be about them. It should be sort of an effort to connect their individual passions and motivations to a shared, larger purpose. What is the role that you play in the community that you exist to serve? What are you doing to make that community a better place? And all of this comes down to sort of having a very strong value proposition. There's an entire section in the membership guide that details a very sort of step-by-step process for articulating your value proposition, which can sometimes feel very wonky, but we try to sort of simplify the process and make it as easy to follow as possible. Next question is, how well do you know your audience? Membership models succeed when they are fascinated with what potential members value, and they continually invest time and resources in getting to know their audience members better. This is a real mindset shift. So instead of just assuming what members want, successful membership organizations have developed ways of listening consistently, fresh thinking about what their members actually want, and strong feedback loops to get it right. So some of the baseline things you're going to want to know about your audience in order to design a membership program that has traction are where they spend their time online, how they access your work, their willingness and ability to support you financially, which you might understand based on sort of how essential they find your work, how many times a week do they visit, what they value about your organization, which is not just do you find it valuable, but what is it about your organization they value? Do they appreciate the creative storytelling? Do they appreciate the investigative work? Do they love your morning newsletter? Knowing what they value will help you make your pitches more resonant. Their unmet information and community needs. So where are they finding voids that you could potentially step in to fill? And in particular, what would make membership valuable for them? Many news organizations miss that step. And I think that that is a really big problem, because it isn't enough just to say that becoming a member supports your work. You need to show how becoming a member of your organization also does something useful for them. And maybe that useful thing is that you provide essential information that helps them do their job or helps them make better decisions about their child's education. But you always need to take that beat to connect becoming a member of your organization back to what it does for them. And that sort of gets into, many of you are probably familiar with the human-centered design framework. What you see here is sort of the three pillars of human-centered design: desirability, feasibility, and viability. And it is the audience research that helps you tackle that sort of desirability question. How can you make sure that you are building something that is useful and desirable? Because that is what builds the habit. That is what builds the loyalty that sort of underpins a successful membership program. Audience research is your tool to get feedback, assess member satisfaction, and adapt to changes along the way, especially as your membership program matures and you get to a certain number of members. What your overall member base expects of you might be a little bit different than what your membership base wanted or expected of you when it was just sort of 100 of your super fans that have been with you from the beginning. And we just really generally advise at MPP not to skip the audience research step, even a basic survey, because without that audience research, you are going to end up making these decisions based on sort of flawed premises, such as newsroom hierarchy, and your personal life experiences as journalists. And I think it's important to understand that we as journalists don't consume and seek out information in the same way that the general public does. And if you design a membership program based on what you, the journalists, want, there's a good chance that it won't resonate with many people in the community beyond those who work in other media organizations or work in politics and sort of have the similar information needs to you. And the last thing that I will share before we move into some questions, actually two more, sorry, is, can you staff your membership effort? This is one of the questions that we get the most often at MPP. Okay, I'm launching a membership program, or I finally have enough revenue for my membership program and I can hire. What should I do? Membership requires sort of editorial, analytics, community management, tech, and marketing skills. And so it can be a very overwhelming thing to staff for. but here are a few sort of basic guidelines, and you'll find a ton of resources on staffing in the membership guide. So questions to ask yourself is, how will you break down silos and coordinate across all of these teams? Membership is a complicated intervention because it touches every part of an organization. So unless you're one person team, several people will own some part of that membership effort, and you're going to have to figure out how you can coordinate amongst them. I think another thing that's really important to understand is sometimes you don't always need to hire a new person, especially early stages. You might have all the skills that you need within your organization, but distributed amongst a couple different people. And so maybe all you need is a new weekly meeting to coordinate amongst those people. And we really encourage a membership puzzle project to think about hiring first from a skills-based approach rather than a roles-based approach. So a lot of people will ask us, okay, so when do I hire a membership editor? And I come back and say, well, what do you need this membership editor to do? What are the skills that they need to have? And that's why first you might find that you actually have all the skills within your organization. And second, you can design a sort of bespoke job that sort of fits exactly in your needs. One of the things that you'll find in the membership guide, two things that you'll find in the membership guide and the staffing section. First off is a list of must-have and nice-to-have skills for any organization that is pursuing membership that you can use to sort of check against the skills you already have. And also we have a folder of membership job descriptions. So we have probably 25 roles in there from news organizations who have submitted their job descriptions for us, just to be able to sort of share with others. So please feel free to take that folder and steal examples from other newsrooms. And the last one that I'll talk about today that is incredibly important is sort of knowing how to test your ideas. There is no sort of simple one size fits all for membership. What works in a newsroom in Rome might not work for a newsroom in a much smaller town. But this is why we encourage organizations to get comfortable with experimentation. People are complex. It can take a while to figure out what works for you and your audience members. Adopting a test and learn approach to decision making with adopting a product mindset, in other words, will be key. So lightweight tests are sort of the most efficient way to figure out your membership strategy. Turning your questions about your members into testable ideas is the way to do that. An example of that is, if you think potential members want to weigh in on your editorial agenda, you might host a series of open newsroom events. How many people come? What kind of feedback do you get? I see questions in the chat in Italian. I don't know if we're having any issues with audio or slides, but let me know if so. And the example that I will give of sort of that test and learn mindset comes from the Daily Maverick in South Africa. Back in 2018, and we have a case study on this in the membership guide. Back in 2018, the Daily Maverick was ready to launch their membership program, but their tech wasn't fully in place. They were still having trouble connecting a few things, getting recurring credit card payments set up, but they really needed to start bringing in that revenue. They were at a place where they could not postpone any longer. So what they ended up doing was launching a one-time donations drive, not just to bring money in the door, but also to test some of their assumptions about what kind of messages would resonate, how much they could reasonably expect people to contribute, and more than 1,200 people, 1,200 people participated in that donations drive. And so the Daily Maverick sort of turned them into a beta membership group. They surveyed, they sent an extensive survey to these 1,200 people. They got 600 or 700 responses back, and that asked them questions such as, what type of coverage do you appreciate most about the Daily Maverick? What motivated you to contribute? How often do you read the Daily Maverick? Do you read it through the newsletter? Do you just come directly to our website? So they use this group of super fans as sort of a test group to test out some of their assumptions. They also learned things like they put their membership asks in their newsletter and at the bottom of articles and in buttons on site and in pop-ups. And so they also studied the conversion rates across all of those different places they promoted membership, promoted the donations drive, so that when they did launch membership, they could sort of weed out some of the plans that they knew wouldn't work based on the experience with this test. And so what I really appreciate about this example and why we wrote a case study on it is that the Daily Maverick turned a problem, a delay, into an opportunity to gather data to lessen their chances of making mistakes when the high stakes sort of membership program launch happened. And you'll find a really detailed case study in there. They even shared with us the survey that they sent around to all of these sort of beta members, which you'd be welcome to steal for your own sort of membership launch survey. And that is all I'm going to go through today. These 6 questions are the first 6 of 9 questions that we encourage news organizations to ask themselves before launching membership. You will find the other 3 questions in the section, as well as all the information that you need to sort of get your newsroom to yes on every single one of these questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ariel. Just a question, because some people ask for this. Can you share with us the slides?
Yeah, no problem. Absolutely.
Perfect. And if there is not a question by public, I have many questions that I would like to make. But starting from the 2 first. The first one, because I thought about it all along the work, the translation work, because I worked during the pandemic too. And so I wonder if pandemic, because pandemic put many people in danger, in economic danger. Many of us lost work, and it's an experience that we share also as Slow News. A lot of people have to cut their wallet about news. But I wonder, do you think that membership could be more resilient than a subscription model in this period or not?
I don't know that. I don't know that membership is more resilient than a subscription model in this moment. What I will say is that news organizations around the world and like every geography that we studied found that despite the economic hardships that people were having, that if people were able to financially support their work, they saw the highest numbers of support that we've ever seen. I think that was a sort of first off, news organizations getting very transparent about their financial challenges. Advertising dried up overnight and people had no choice but to share what was happening. And so people were very honest about their financial needs. And I think also their audience members were sort of seeing the essentiality of their work because of how scary the pandemic was, how much urgent information they needed, how much medical misinformation was out there, vaccine misinformation was out there. And so they knew that they needed these news outlets. So we saw incredibly high levels of support. And what was interesting is many of the newsrooms that we spoke to from like 2020 to 2021 said that they had previously had many people very skeptical about audience revenue. If we asked people to pay for our work, no one's going to pay for it. But then the pandemic they forced them to try, even though they were worried it wouldn't work. And they were pleasantly surprised when they did try it. I do think in most cases, one of the key differentiators between membership and subscription beyond the relationship is the presence of a paywall. A subscription-based organization has to have a paywall because that is the value proposition of paying. If you pay in order to get past the paywall. There is also, with membership, many news organizations, I don't know about Slow News, but most member-driven newsrooms don't have a paywall, and they are asking people to pay to keep the news free for everyone. In this environment where we are so concerned about making sure that essential, reliable information is available to everybody, I do think the value proposition of membership it's more altruistic. It shows a concern not just for yourself but for others, and so I think that potentially during the pandemic it became easier to make the membership pitch. Because you could sort of show the essentiality of your work and it wasn't stopping people who could not afford to pay from accessing this sort of life-saving information around vaccines and how COVID is spreading and things like that.
Yeah, I hope you have reason. Because as Slow News, we have both. The model is evolving, and so we keep some content under a paywall, but we release a lot in this last year.
Yeah.
But we notice a lot of people who stop the subscription because the pandemic, because all the economic issues related to the pandemic.
Yeah, we did hear to that point some of the newsrooms we studied, including the Daily Maverick and El Diario, did say that they told members, if you can't afford to pay, we don't want to shut you out of the community. Just send us an email and let us know. And I know that they then proceeded to send emails every few months. Hey, if you're able to start paying again, we'd really appreciate it. But if not, don't worry about it. You can remain a member, because they felt that it was important not to remove people from that community because of like financial hardship that was sort of beyond their control.
Yeah,
So we did
the
see people
same.
there.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah.
The gift to who cannot afford. Before to let's speak also Lorenzo, I would like to pose another little question. Because a lot of people that is in our community, in the most of all in the slow news, the slow journalist community, wish to make his or her project able to resist, to still in the time and to become sustainable. So the question is, and reading and translating the guide, I know the answer, but I wish like to you to repeat. Is it possible to make a membership alone? One people for an entire membership program?
Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely is. And I have been teaching for the last year and a half with the Journalism Creators Program at CUNY in New York, which is entirely made up of sort of single or tiny newsrooms, many of whom are pursuing membership. It's absolutely possible. That membership might look different. We feel at MPP that the value proposition, the sort of messaging is incredibly, it becomes even more important, that sort of shared sense of identity, when you're either a tiny single person newsroom or you're a huge newsroom with a huge membership program like The Guardian. Because in both cases, you can't offer the sort of high touch participation that those news organizations in the middle often offer as sort of the value proposition of their membership program. So we have a case study in the membership guide with a single person newsroom with membership. His name is Matt Keyser. He publishes, excuse my language, but What the Fuck Just Happened Today. It's a newsletter that he launched at the beginning of the Trump administration to cover what's happening in American politics every day. And he has a membership program, and it's very simple. You know, okay, he gives members early access to certain features. So he invites members sort of be product testers and weigh in on some of the decisions he's making about the product. But otherwise, and he says it very clearly, being a member is mostly about sort of good vibes to support this work and ensure this newsletter continues to exist. And he is able to more than cover his costs with their sort of recurring membership revenue. I actually find it really interesting because he's one of the only people that we spoke to who is completely supported by membership. He doesn't get money from anywhere else, and it covers his costs, his hosting costs, improvements to the product, tech, processing fees, all of that is covered fully by membership. But he keeps the membership program very simple. And that's where I think audience research and focus can be really helpful, because if you know what your audience members value about your work, you can make sure that you're only offering things that they actually want and not wasting your time on things that they don't care about at all.
Yeah, thank you for these last words, because I think it's an injection of hope for many people.
Yeah.
I switch in Italian perché appunto volevo introdurre anche Lorenzo, che è adesso così dovreste vedere Lorenzo, spero. Sorry Ariel if you don't understand.
It's fine.
Ciao Lorenzo, vabbè, spiego un attimo perché sei qua. Anche tu hai lavorato a tuo modo, nel senso con UPPA, a questa operazione che abbiamo avuto appunto come idea noi di Slow News, ma che abbiamo allargato ad altri attori. Ti interessa anche tu la cultura della membership? Anche tu come Slow News vieni da diciamo una realtà di subscription all'inizio pura, mi raccontavi, ma poi stai evolvendo anche tu verso la direzione della membership. Vuoi dirci in 2 parole qual è, cioè cosa ne pensi di questo modello, perché potrebbe essere interessante e come mai sei interessato con UPPA a questa evoluzione?
Allora sì, intanto buonasera a tutti. Dunque, UPPA è una realtà che fa informazione e all'incirca 5 anni fa abbiamo completamente eliminato qualsiasi tipo di advertising o di pubblicità e abbiamo scelto di proseguire sulla strada di essere, diciamo, 100% sostenuti dai nostri lettori e dalle nostre lettrici. E quindi è chiaro che per noi si pone il problema della sostenibilità economica e ovviamente anche delle risorse per crescere con il nostro progetto, creare sempre nuovi formati, nuovi canali, nuovi strumenti, eccetera, eccetera. Quindi chiaramente questo è un problema centrale. Dal mio punto di vista, le persone che oggi lavorano nei media devono tenere a mente che l'ecosistema, diciamo, della pubblicità è un ecosistema nel quale i grandi player, e quindi essenzialmente Google e Facebook, più qualcun altro, inevitabilmente accentreranno sempre di più su di sé gli introiti pubblicitari. Difficilmente dei media, anche di medie dimensioni, saranno in grado di competere con l'efficienza algoritmica di questi grandi player, e quindi senza parlare poi dei piccoli media, che è proprio impossibile. Quindi a questo punto le opzioni diventano o diventare o vendere, diciamo, la propria audience a Google o a Facebook, che poi la rivenderà a qualcun altro, oppure camminare con le proprie gambe. Noi abbiamo scelto di camminare con le nostre gambe, quindi appunto di essere sostenuti dalla nostra community. Siamo partiti con un modello appunto di subscription, ma stiamo transitando piano piano verso un modello più incentrato sulla membership. Come lo facciamo? Ma essenzialmente lo facciamo coinvolgendo sempre di più la nostra community o comunità di lettori e di lettrici, che è ormai abbastanza grande, e soprattutto dal 2022 c'è un progetto abbastanza come dire, intensivo di interazione con l'audience, ad esempio per dare la priorità agli argomenti più richiesti, per comunque tenere, come dire, un filo diretto con queste persone che ci seguono.
Sì, tra l'altro mi ricorda molto l'evoluzione che sta facendo anche la community di Slow News. Io vedo che non ci sono delle domande per Ariel, e visto che si è connessa dall'altra parte del mondo e per lei è mattino e forse deve iniziare la sua giornata lavorativa, la lascerei andare, quindi la saluterei. Ariel, I don't know if you understand the Italian, but okay.
No.
I'm saying that if there is not any question more, due to the fact that you are in your morning, and it's maybe late for work, I can let you go to
Sure.
your daily work, and just a few seconds to thank you so much another time, you and all the team that work about this handbook, this guide, because it's very precious. We are working now to design a masterclass about it, to let the membership culture enter in Italy and conquer some other people. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
It
Thank
was
you.
so precious to listen to hear you, and also to read the guide.
No, thank you. And for those of you who are listening in, I just want to tell you what an immense task the Slow News team took on, because that membership guide is over 200,000 words, between the handbook and the 36 case studies I think we're at now, because we've added case studies since they began. So, and they did this, you know, it's an immense task. So I just want to congratulate you on that. I very much appreciate how much work that is, having worked very closely with the Spanish translation team. So thank you so much for helping our work be available in other languages and helping it travel. When the Membership Puzzle project ended in August, one of the reasons that we felt like we could end is because there were so many other people around the world working to bring our research into other places, and it had sort of diffused across many other places. And I want to say a big thank you in particular to one of our coaches, Federica Carabini, who is Italian and has done so much work with us in helping our work travel in Italy. And so big thank you to her as well, and to you.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good day. Ciao
Bye,
ragazzi.
Ariel.
Bye.
Niente, per concludere, anche perché qua anche da noi non è mattina ma è sera e forse si avvicina l'ora per qualcuno dell'aperitivo e per altri di fine giornata, ringrazio tutti quelli che sono stati presenti, ringrazio Lorenzo. Allora, qui nella chat in sordina vi metto il link della versione in italiano del verification, cioè scusa, della membership guide. Il piccolo annuncio che abbiamo da fare io, Lorenzo, ma anche altri, è che stiamo lavorando per proporvi al più presto una masterclass sulla membership, che soprattutto, cioè la stiamo pensando soprattutto per dare la possibilità a singoli e piccole redazioni di provare a sviluppare, progettare e sostenere un progetto giornalistico attraverso la membership. Avrete i dettagli al più presto. Se vi siete iscritti a questo panel, sia se lo state vedendo in diretta, sia se lo state vedendo invece in differita nei prossimi giorni, riceverete costantemente gli aggiornamenti su questo progetto, che presumibilmente potrebbe partire intorno ad aprile 2022, se possiamo dirlo, Lorenzo. Non diciamo molto di più, ci stiamo lavorando. Intanto io vi invito a leggere la guida, perché troverete dentro una valangata di spunti utili e veramente speranzosi, diciamo, se si può dire, perché dà speranza a un sacco dà risposta a un sacco di domande che in tanti creator, giornalisti e comunicatori si stanno ponendo in questi mesi soprattutto, ma anche negli ultimi anni. Quindi ringrazio tutti voi che siete stati qui ad ascoltare anche in inglese, è stato un esperimento spero riuscito. Riceverete comunque il video sottotitolato al più presto. Ringrazio Lorenzo, ci sentiamo
Grazie a te,
molto
Andrea.
presto per dare seguito a questo lavoro e di nuovo una buona serata a tutti e grazie a chi adesso sto leggendo alcuni commenti e grazie a tutti. Buona serata.
Alla prossima. Ciao.
Ciao.